Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Thank you all for joining in and for being together with us on this day. It's an exciting webinar and a very exciting speaker, especially. As we wait for him to join us, he'll be joining us just in a second. I invite you all to please introduce yourself. If you want to throw your name in the chat, where are you joining in from, what school do you go to, and what are you excited to learn from Lex. And if anyone would like to unmute and introduce himself to the rest of the room, let us know what you're working on, what your project is. Please feel free to raise your hand and we'll call upon you to speak. Once again, thank you so much for being here with us, and we're very, very excited to be able to spend the next 1 hour together. All right, I see we have fellows joining in from Malawi. Hello, Henry. We have fellows joining in from Nigeria. Hello, Faith. I would love to know where everyone else is joining in from. Please throw your names in the chat. I see Sazia Shiza from Pakistan. Thank you so much for being here. Safia from Bangladesh. Thank you so much. And I also see Cynthia from South Africa. Thank you very much for joining. I see Oruto from Kenya. I'm Kenyan myself, so thank you for being here with me. Vikram from India. We have fellows joining in from Rwanda. I can already see that it's going to be a very. I see Alexandra from Greece. I can already see this is going to be a very multicultural room. Thank you so much for being here. Before we officially kick off, is if anyone would like to unmute themselves and introduce and speak to us, feel free to raise your hand, and our colleagues will unmute you so that you can introduce yourself. All right, I see Francis and Panache have both raised their hands. Let's hear from both of them, and then we can kick off the webinar. Francis, how are you?
Yes, good. It's in Uganda. It's good afternoon, actually. Yeah, so my name is Francis Abre, and I am a Millennium Fellow and as well as the campus director, Kampala International University in Uganda. I'm so glad to be here and hoping to learn a little bit more. I'm glad to be part of this team. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Francis, and our greetings to everyone joining in from Uganda like yourself. Um, I think I saw another hand, but in the meantime, I see more students from Bangladesh, Nigeria, Bangladesh, India, the United States. It's very, very early for you. South Africa, very well represented. Panache, did you want to say hi? Panache
Yes,
Makoni. All
yes.
right.
Hi, how are you? My name is Panashe Makoni. I'm from Zimbabwe, and I'm a law student at the University of Zimbabwe. And my project is Be Good, Do Good. It's mainly focused on equipping the youths and people in different communities with legal expertise. I think it's very important for people to know their constitutional rights, to know that they have certain rights, that someone cannot just infringe on them. And also, my project also targets SDG 4 and SDG 10.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Panache, and all the best as you implement your very important project. I know we all want to say hi, but our speaker is here with us, so I'll go ahead and introduce him. First of all, just in terms of ground rules, we will kick off with a keynote from Lex, and then we'll do a few questions, me and him, and then we want the bulk of this conversation to be, we want the bulk of this session to be a conversation. So if you have any questions from Lex, either after having explored his work or from his keynotes, please start to note those down. We want to see as many questions as possible in the chat when we call for them, and we want to see as many hands raised as possible when the time comes. So it is an absolute pleasure to be able to introduce you today, Lex. Lex is the executive director of the UM6P School of Collective Intelligence in Morocco and lectures in advocacy at Sciences Po Paris. He's trained in classics and community organizing. He served as mobilization strategist for the campaigns of Barack Obama in 2008 and for Emmanuel Macron in 2017. He has led projects in democratic innovation and leadership for UNICEF, the US State Department, the French National Assembly, and the National Democratic Institute. He has served as legislative counsel in the 11th United States Congress between 2009 and 2011. He has organized on 6 United States presidential campaigns and has worked to advance democratic innovation at the European Commission and in India, Tunisia, Egypt, Uganda, Senegal, Czech Republic, and Ukraine. I was very fortunate to have met Lex in Morocco 2 years ago, and it's an absolute honor for me to be able to introduce you today, Lex. So the floor is over to you.
Thank you so much, James. Can everyone hear me okay? Can you
Yes,
hear
we
me
can
okay?
hear you.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. And can you now see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I really want to say, first of all, my gratitude for this invitation. My passion is helping leaders develop their practice of leadership. My purpose in life is to do what I can to make a more democratic world, to make democracy not just something on paper, but a real practice and lived experience. And one of the ways that I try to do that is by helping leaders like you develop, I hope, your understanding and concepts and tools of leadership in a way that can help your societies develop their own models of citizen-centered democracy based on the collective intelligence of all people and not on elections and political parties alone. The model that we have been handed is now failing. And so it's going to be up to your generation to invent new models. And I want to present a couple of ideas about that hopefully can inspire you to do that. The first story I want to tell involves this cow. This is not an ordinary cow. This is a very beautiful cow that lived in the west of England in 1904. This cow was at the center of a contest at a festival, at a rural festival. And the contest was to guess the weight of the cow. So people would come by this, this big festival, lots and lots of people, and would put their guess in on a little piece of paper with their name and pay 10 cents. And the one with the best guess would win a big cheese of this gorgeous cow. And at the festival that day was this man named Francis Galton. Galton was one of the smartest researchers of his generation, and he invented lots of things in modern data science, including something called a spreadsheet. So if you work with Microsoft Excel or Google Spreadsheets, this is the man who invented that way of organizing data. And he was very interested in how to find expertise, where we can find the experts, right, in a group that can help us solve a hard problem. So he saw all these people coming in front of the cow guessing the weight. He saw these little kids, a 10-year-old boy or someone from London who had never, seen a farm before. And he said, well, these people obviously don't know anything, right? Where are the real experts? Like, is it going to be the farmer from next door? Is it going to be an old farmer, a young farmer? And so he said, this is a kind of an interesting natural experiment. So he asked the guy organizing the contest, he said, at the end of the day, can I have all the little pieces of paper? And the guy said, yeah, you're a little weird, but sure. And so he made his own spreadsheet with all of the guesses. So there were 787 guesses, and he calculated the median of these guesses was 1,197 pounds. And he goes back to the farmer. He says, what was the exact weight? Because in this, median, people were all over the place, right? Some people guess 200, some people guess 2,000, some people guess 3,000. So he goes back and he says, what's the actual exact weight of the cow, right? This is the exact weight of the cow, right? So individually, the people in this crowd did not know how much the cow weighed. Collectively, they knew exactly how much the cow weighed. Right. And so Galton was a little bit surprised by that. He thought there'd be one or two smart people, but actually what he found was that the crowd as a crowd had a wisdom that even the smartest person in the crowd didn't have. Right. And so this gives us kind of our first question about how collective intelligence works. So in your guys' opinion, what were the conditions necessary for the crowd to know this answer, to know the weight of the cow? What had to be true? What conditions necessary? Just go ahead and shout out. Unmute yourself and shout out. Would any group of people get this right answer? Any group of people composed and organized in any way, would they have gotten this right answer? Any size group, any kind of people, any kind of organization, they would have somehow as a group gotten the right answer. Do you think? Is that what you think?
Lex, we just allowed the room. We just allowed everyone to be able to unmute themselves. So if everyone would like to unmute themselves, you now have the ability.
James,
So
if you can look at the chat also, maybe you can tell me
yes.
if there's. Okay, I see
Yes,
some people typing in the chat. Diversity of guesses, very good. What else? Let's catch up what you've been up to. Same here. Okay, so diversity of guesses. No, because there were more farmers in the crowd. So you're touching on two different issues, which are both really true. One is who had the right information to answer this question? Now imagine a kid of 10 years old. He doesn't know how much a cow weighs, but he knows how much his dog weighs. Is that useful information to make a good guess? Or someone from London who's a mechanic doesn't know how much the cow weighs, but knows how much his car weighs. And he says, oh, that cow is probably 1/3 of my car. Right, so you see, yeah, exactly, something to compare the cow to. So the relevant information to solve this problem was not held by one person, it was distributed out in the world. So lots of people had lots of different diverse pieces of information that helped them make a good guess. And they didn't all think the same, right? We call this cognitive diversity. They made mistakes based on their interpretations of the knowledge they had, but they didn't all make the same mistake. Right? Now imagine we had a second farmer next to the first one who said, I know how much it weighs. It weighs 1,500 pounds. And he said that all day long as the people were coming. Would that raise collective intelligence or lower it, in your opinion? If you had one guy saying all day long, I know the answer is 1,500 pounds, right? Would that affect collective intelligence at all?
It wouldn't.
Someone said raise it. Someone said lower. Yes, it will. Yes, it will. To some extent, it might. Those of you guys who say lower, you're right, right? And this is the really important part of this crowd wisdom example is that no one was influencing anyone else's guess, right? Even if we don't want to be influenced, we hear 1,500, we hear the number 1,500, and we see someone who looks like they know something maybe we don't know. That's going to bias our guess. Right. So in addition to being diverse, in addition to being numerous, in addition to all having different information, they had independence of judgment. Right. So we're starting to see, right, what are the drivers of collective intelligence? Just from this one story of the cow, which was one of the first published scientific articles about in our science, right? We see some of the keys to making a smart team or a smart community or a smart society. We need to create the conditions where people can share all the information that they have, whether it's about healthcare or about energy or about the environment, all the things that are out there in the world that are useful to solving a hard problem, right? But then they also need a method, right? So you see effective aggregation. That means that the farmer found a cheap and easy way for everybody to give a guess. Finally, we have the cheese. The cheese motivated people to make a real effort. If you just ask someone randomly, how much is this cow weighs, they're not going to give you a lot of effort. But if you say, if you guess the right answer, you're going to win this huge cheese, then they pay attention, right? Which is the difference between an opinion poll, which no one really cares about. They'll just say whatever the first thing is on their mind, and a real deliberative exercise like a citizens' assembly, where people have an incentive to make an effort and put their real thought into a public problem. So you're seeing here that big groups of people can be smarter even than the smartest individual person in the group, but they have to be organized in the right way, right? So collective intelligence is the capacity of groups under certain conditions to outperform individuals in solving hard problems or doing complex things, right? This is something we do naturally, right? Everyone here is a part of teams, a part of universities, a part of NGOs, a part of companies, right? But have you ever been in a situation where you're in a group or a team that has very smart people, but as a group, you just don't, you're not really succeeding as a group, right? So you have this effective, instead of 1 + 1 = 3, it's 1 + 1 = 0.5, right? Raise your hand or give a thumbs up if that's ever happened to you, right? I see a thumbs up, right? So even though, right, collective intelligence is something we participate in all the time, we're all part of groups, we're all part of communities, collective intelligence can fail. And in fact, it can feel really bad. Stock markets crash. Mobs, kill people in a soccer stadium. No one wanted to die in the soccer stadium. No one intended for other people to die. But a poorly organized crowd can be very dangerous, can be hateful, can cause a lot of violence, can cause a lot of problems, can cause a lot of dumb decisions in government or in business, right? So collective intelligence is something natural in the world, but it's also a science that studies how to compose and organize groups to get that 1 + 1 = 3, right? To get that effect of the group as a group being bigger than the sum of its parts. In our school, in our science, we have people who study the brain, people who study, psychological mechanisms like how we build trust or how we share information the most effectively. We have people who study social science, like me, I study political science, how different forms of governance or different forms of democracy can be effective or less effective. And we have people who build tools, platforms now more and more guided by AI that can help us solve hard problems and lower the cost of getting hundreds and thousands of people into the conversation. In the last 15, 20 years, you have more and more books and references and scientific articles about this new science of groups, right? That we call the science of collective intelligence. So we're learning a lot. There's a lot that we know now in 2025 that we didn't know in the 1990s or the 2000s about what are the conditions that make teams work better, that make companies work better, that make ministries work better. So this science is really emerging quickly. In our school, we're not the very first center dedicated to collective intelligence. That was at MIT in 2004. But we're the first school to propose a master's and PhD in collective intelligence. And we are on the African continent, and we want Africa to be a leader, the global leader in this new science of collective intelligence. That's our ambition. So we work with academic institutions and labs, as well as foundations and ministries, to study and improve our methods of collaboration. So now I'm going to talk politics and leadership, right? I think collective intelligence is the most important science of this century. Why? Because all of us grew up in societies where the political institutions come from many, many years ago, right? I'm American. Our Constitution is already almost 250 years old. The people who made the Constitution had no intention that it would be there for 2 centuries. They thought Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, that they were gonna that their posterity, their grandchildren, would redo the Constitution. So we have a very old system of government in America, and many other countries have systems of government that are based on this model, this 18th century model. And that have built these bureaucracies that are based on 19th century and 20th century models. And yet, and this is true for the companies we work in too, the models of hierarchy and silo and factories that go back 100 years. But our problems are like this, right? Our problems are networked. Our problems are fast moving. Our problems involve managing new technologies. Our problems involve fast moving problems like climate change and migration and demographic change. So we can't use the same institutions from the past to solve the problems of the future. It's just not working. One of the models that I study is the model of ancient Athens. And what I find fascinating about Athenian democracy is it's the first system of self-government to be practiced on the scale of a city. So before cities, when we all lived in villages and in tribes in the forest, politics could be very democratic and egalitarian. Men and women could contribute to decisions. We sat around the fire, we solved problems, right? And still to this day, in small scale societies, groups of 50, 100 people can make decisions without having one king or one ruler or one strongman. But as human beings began to settle in cities and form states, those states were almost always run by one person and an elite around them. Whether it was a king or a pharaoh or an emperor, they had almost all the power centralized at the top, And then the mass majority of people had almost no power at all over the decisions that affected their lives. They just paid taxes, sent their sons to fight in the armies, and worshiped the ruler. Does this sound familiar? Are there any countries that kind of sound like that today? Right. If it sounds familiar, it's because this is the basic default model of the state, right? What I call the threefold cage. It traps people and controls them rather than delivering services to them and listening to them. So only recently, and only in very rare cases, have certain cultures and certain societies thrown off this model of the elite governance and actually created new models of citizen-centered self-government. And the Athenian model was based on direct citizen participation. Now, was it perfect? No. Like every other ancient urban society, they excluded women, they had enslaved people. They were just like every other society in those regards, right? That the political power could only be held by men. Where they were different is that if you were a poor baker or a farmer, you could have the same amount of political power as someone who was born into a wealthy family of aristocrats, right? They radically equalized political power between rich people and poor people in a way that we still have not done 2,500 years later. And so I find it really interesting that the Athenian model, right, of democracy looks nothing like the democracies we have now, right? Why is that? Right? This idea of a truly self-governing society that doesn't require an elite to govern them, right? Why does what we call democracy today in India or Nigeria or France or America look nothing like this? Well, recent studies have shown, right, that these democracies are not democracies. We don't live in democracies, right? We live in societies that call themselves democracies to flatter ourselves, but in fact, what the majority in America or France or Morocco or Nigeria only get what they want when the rich people also want that thing. Right? These are studies that show that when the economic elite wants something, that is a necessary condition for a majority to rule. Right? And so we don't have democracies today. We have republics. And a republic was built on the Roman model. It's very different. This is Cicero, who I did my PhD research on, wrote my first book about. He was a great thinker. He believed in freedom and self-government, but a certain kind of what I call weak self-government that rules by an elite, where people were free, but they did not directly govern. They were free to vote, and they could vote between aristocrat 1 and aristocrat 2, right? Even the beginnings of what we call political factions or parties were there in the Roman world, the Respublica. They had a Senate, and in that Senate, people got there and they stayed for the rest of their lives. Does that sound familiar? Does anyone know politicians who have lived a little too long in politics and who refuse to leave? Does that sound familiar? Right. So the Romans invented that model, right? This is the model we have. And why do we call ourselves democracies? Well, look at our founding documents, right? The American Constitution, the French Declaration of Human Rights, and count the number of times you see the word democracy, right? It's 0. The word democracy does not appear in these documents because we do not live in democratic systems. We have democratic movements. We have democratic campaigns. We have advocacy campaigns that are forms of democracy, which are really precious. But those forms of democracy that we have, that you have maybe participated in, are in tension with the form of government, which is built for elites, wealthy elites, educated elites, to have all the power. Right? That is the world that we live in. It's the world of Rome, not the world of Athens. Right? And this is the model that's failing. The reason why people vote for populists, the reason why people vote for nationalists and racists, right, is because they are tired of being excluded by these elites. The elites who all go to the same universities, the elites who all have the same ideas and wear the same clothes and send their kids to the same holidays, right? Like those are the ones who are running the countries, and people don't like that. People are frustrated, and they see through this lie that democracy is limited to voting for a political party in election. Right? They see through it, and so now we have to invent something new. We're already seeing in places like Iceland and Ireland and Taiwan new forms of citizen-centered democratic decision-making. Not yet. There is no democracy in the world yet. Right? But we're seeing, especially I'd say in Taiwan and Ireland, are the two cases where they've really gone beyond the electoral model of citizen participation to having large groups of people involved directly in public decision making. And if this is something you're interested in learning more about, we can talk more about it. But there are new models that are based very closely, actually, on the Athenian model of citizen participation that are are waiting to be experimented and scaled up. And now with AI, we have the possibility of scaling them up in really exciting ways. So what are the 3 steps? So this is my last thought for you. What kind of leaders do we need to make democracy possible? Because democracy doesn't exist yet. It's a very good idea. We don't have it yet, right? So first in order to make change in your country, you need to be part of a guiding coalition, right? That means a coalition of people, of leaders who include both insiders who understand how power works, right? Who have access to resources, as well as outsiders who bring in fresh energy and fresh thinking and the willingness to do something differently. So you need coalitions. Those coalitions need to have strategic capacity. They can't just be making things up. They have to be able to focus on how they can most effectively exert power and change the system. They need inspiring stories, right? Now with hashtags, right, that bring people together around a common rallying cry, a common set of values. And this group of leaders needs to be thinking about more than just themselves. Right? You need people in this group who are courageous and who aren't just trying to get power for themselves and their families, right? Because that kills movements when people just try to get power for themselves. So that's number 1. Number 2, you need a coalition. Number 1, you need a movement. It's structured in a certain way, what I call participatory movements, where we're not just showing up and following what the leaders tell us to do, that everybody can exert and operate their own kind of leadership in a distributed way by forming teams and committees in their neighborhoods to participate in these overall movement activities, whether it's protests or different kinds of advocacy, different kinds of creative ways of putting pressure on the system. Laddered engagement means you need to give people who maybe don't feel comfortable about politics, they're really scared about taking a risk, give them easy and light ways of getting involved, but then try to bring them up the ladder so that people who are just getting a little bit involved can do more and more. Nonviolent movements do better than violent movements. So in order for a movement for political change to succeed, you need people to be committed to the ideas of nonviolence and to be creative, because the people in power, the politicians, the people in power do not want them things to change, right? So you need creativity, you need courage, you need nonviolence. And finally, you need what the Greeks called a kairos, which is a key opportunity where there's a crisis, there's a high dissatisfaction with the status quo, there's some kind of triggering event that galvanizes attention, that brings people's concentration, and that allows a movement that's well organized with this coalition to take a focused collective action, right? That can inspire people and can cause the arc of history to bend toward a new model. I call this the change trifecta. Because I think, having studied how movements have succeeded in the past, whether it's the Philippines, South Korea, or the civil rights movement in the US, or the movements that toppled the Soviet rule in Eastern Europe, in Poland and Czech Republic, to more recent examples in Taiwan and Ireland, these 3 elements were always present. So if you want to create political change and be a leader in your community, I encourage you to think about these 3 ideas as something you can put into practice. Okay, so with that, I'm going to give you a final quote. "I cannot too often repeat," says Walt Whitman, the great American poet, "that democracy is a word, the real gist of which, the real meaning of which still sleeps quite unawakened, notwithstanding the many great tempests out of which its syllables have come." So people, tempest, stormy language around democracy. It's still a word that sleeps, right? It's a great word whose history remains unwritten because that history has yet to be enacted. And that was Walt Whitman writing in the 1870s. So that's my challenge to you about collective intelligence as a force for leadership and change in our societies. With that, I will open the floor to questions.
Thank you so much, Lex. Just an incredible keynote. Really appreciate it. I resonated with I think everything you shared. I think your notes on democracies especially, and I saw someone in the chat typing while you were speaking saying in Africa's leaders don't want to leave, and I think it's something that many of us, not just in Africa, are sort of contending with in our nations. And I also, resonated with, your notes on diversity of thought and the need for it, and cognitive diversity. So I'm avoiding the compulsion to conform, realizing it's important to think differently and then to contribute that different thought to our collective pool of our shared intelligence. So thank you very much. Just a quick note to everyone. We now head into the question and answer section of this conversation. If you have any question for Lex, please just type it in the chat or raise your hand and I'll call on you. And as we wait for questions, Lex, I just wanna maybe throw in a question, and I think this is something that you always see, as sort of a critique of democracy and spaces of collective contribution, I think, including since Platonian times. But it is always said that collective intelligence depends on including everyone's voice, but meritocracy emphasizes being guided by expertise and knowledge. Do you think democracy and meritocracy can sometimes be at odds, and how do you make sense of that? And how do we balance now societies where sort of that expert guidance and the wisdom of the collective, including even those who maybe are deemed to be uneducated, so that the entire society can develop without leaving anyone behind?
It's a great question. So I think we need to first unlearn some things that we think about expertise. We have a very narrow notion, I think, especially in Western English-speaking institutions, that experts are people with diplomas. No diploma, no expertise. And we also have a very limited idea of education, which is that education can only happen in a classroom. And that people who aren't in a classroom are uneducated. Whereas there are many, many people who have no degrees, but have enormous knowledge, enormous education, and enormous talent and ideas to contribute. So that's one thing, right? We need to think differently about what is an expert, right? So a woman who is selling in her community, selling peanuts for 50 years knows a lot about her community, right? And that woman, even though she maybe never had the chance to go to university, right, she should be at the center of a conversation about economic policy. Now, is she going to have all the answers? No. This is why we need groups. We don't just think about how smart is the average person. We think about how diverse is the group, right? And you cannot make a good economic development policy if you are not including the elderly woman with 50 years of experience in the market, right? So that's the first thing. We need to have a broader notion of expertise that includes people with life experience, with practical knowledge, not just with book knowledge. Now, book knowledge is really important, right? So let's take the COVID vaccine, right? We couldn't have made collectively as a society a COVID vaccine if we didn't have really good scientists, right? Who have really good degrees and who've spent all the time in universities and labs. That's important, right? But in order to deliver the vaccine, you couldn't just rely on people with that small amount of expertise. You need to know how communities actually build trust and communicate and spread information neighbor to neighbor. So even in situations where you need high expertise, technical expertise, they can't do it alone, right? They need people from the communities who know how to mobilize people, how to win trust, how to translate into local language that people understand. And in ancient Athens, just like in modern deliberative democracy, we have a principle called experts on tap, not on top. What does that mean? It means that if you're bringing citizens together, a diverse group, you want to give them access to experts on tap, people who can answer a question about the law, or answer a question about economics, or answer a question about, and help them learn, right? Because you're not just creating a poll. Polls are stupid. Polls don't tell you anything because people don't make an effort to answer polls. Right? You want to create a learning machine, like a learning structure where the old woman from the market can come and the young person from the dentistry school can come and the lawyer from the state capital can come, and they all come together and they all learn something new from each other and from these experts who are on tap. The problem is we usually put experts on top. We say that the people who have the degrees, they're the ones who should make the decisions. Whereas experts have blind spots, right? Sometimes they go to the same schools, they live too long away from their communities, and they don't really understand how things really work in the community anymore, right? So this is why we need to have this broader view of collective intelligence and how it works. So that helps us redesign our political systems with this broader, more democratic notion of knowledge and expertise.
That's an
Seeing some
incredible
positive feedback in the chat. Thank you guys for all the hearts. I love the hearts. Makes my day.
Thank you. Thanks to you,
Next question.
Lex. Yeah, my next question is with regards to participatory movements, which you've, I think, touched on. Most of the students in the chat right now are working on a project or another that is a grassroots movement in, just trying to respond to a community issue. And in your 2023 work, A Brief History of Collective Intelligence, Democracy, and Governance, you wrote that, and I want to quote here, "We are a species that has thrived on collective intelligence, even as we have also scorned and misused it." So looking at today's world, and also the young people that you've had a chance to interact with, who are building these sorts of movements, what role do you think, us young people who are trying to be builders of these movements and shapers of our societies, what roles do you think we can play in shaping how the future generations will think about democracy and governance?
So, I mean, you have an enormous opportunity, especially those of you in countries that have been dictated to by the international community, who have been told what the right model of governance is, and you know that it's not the right one, right? You have an opportunity to think differently. And what our school is dedicated to is to giving you practical tools. I can't give them all in 1 hour on a webinar, but you can visit our school, you can visit our Leadership Academy at the Bridge Africa program that James is a part of, and learn more. You can also go on my YouTube if you're interested in learning more about my tools for leadership. You can type my name, Lex Paulson, into YouTube, and I have a free channel with all kinds of videos about narrative and power mapping and other leadership skills. That you need if you want to create movements and actually change things, actually put pressure in the right place at the right time to change the systems to become more just, more generous, more inclusive, and all that. So I think what I would recommend a couple of things to young people who are looking at being a part of movements. The first is find good mentors near you, right? And a good mentor is not someone who necessarily has power, but someone who has contributed to making the community a better place to live, right? And that might be in small ways, or bigger ways. But every one of us, I'm lucky to have, 6, 7 mentors who have shaped my approach to learning and leadership. Most importantly, Marshall Gans, who you'll read about in my or you'll see in my YouTube channel, who is I'll put in the Marshall Gans Leading Change Network. Harvard. Okay, so if you're looking for more leadership tools, look for Leading Change Network. Their website online is fantastic, and they have all kinds of free tools for leaders, for movements. And I'm very much this is the man who helped create the strategy of Barack Obama's campaign in 2008 that I participated in. And he has trained people from all over the world at Harvard, 5,000 to 6,000 people now in our network. And these are leadership skills that first you need to, have your own leadership practice that works on yourself to work on your own ability to listen and to ability to empathize and your ability to be humble and admit mistakes. These are really important leadership practices you can start with, yourself in your teams. And then, how do you organize? These are skills that have been practiced all over the world that you can adapt. Of course, every society is a little different, but the rules of power actually are very similar all over the world. As politicians tend to think the same way. I've done this work in India and Ukraine and Burundi and in Morocco, and the U.S. Washington D.C. and politicians are pretty similar all over the world. They want to keep power once they have it. They're very vain. They are better talkers than thinkers, right? These are all truths. And so if you understand how power works, you can start building more effective movements using things like narrative, power mapping, mapping the actors in your community to understand who has influence on this issue. So you can find all this on my YouTube channel if you want to learn more about movement organizing. But strategy is really important. Strategy is the art of separating out all the different things, all that matter on your issue and finding the one that's both very important and that you can affect. And focusing your attention on that part of the issue and keeping your attention focused on the issue. That's the art of strategy. And a lot of movements that I see are full of passion, full of energy, full of good feeling, but are not strategic. They just copy what the movements did before. Let's go to the street. Let's go do a protest, right? And we're moving into a post-protest world where protests are just one of a whole toolkit of activities we need to put pressure on the system to gain attention, to persuade people, to bring about concrete changes. So start locally. Don't just trust social media because Twitter and Facebook were not made to help you organize. They were made to divide and polarize people. They can be useful for organizing events, for getting videos, diffused quickly. But Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok are not they're not ideal organizing tools. From what I've seen, Discord is a lot more useful. But there are lots of interesting civic technologies out there, platforms that many of which are open source. Console, Decidim, frankly, there's a long list of tools you can use that are open source and that allow you to really build movements at scale. But the most important way you build trust in a movement is face to face, right? So technology should only be something that amplifies and can accelerate, but it can't create relationships. True relationships of trust and meaning come from this face-to-face interaction. So you have to start local, start with people face to face, and then use these tools to scale up. Yes, I've been following. I see the question in the chat about the Gen Z protest in Nepal. Yes, in fact, I met one of these young organizers from Nepal in Greece a few weeks ago at the Athens Democracy Forum, and I'm extremely impressed, right? And you see these same three elements of the change trifecta. They had a coalition that included many outsiders, young people, but as well as some insiders, including now this transitional prime minister who was a judge in the system. So you needed a coalition that included some insiders, some outsiders, had a very inspiring combined story, had a commitment, at least in the initial stages, to nonviolence. I think that commitment to nonviolence was only partial, as we saw there was a lot of property damage, but as far as I know, not a lot of people politicians were murdered or killed, which would have been, I think, very bad for that movement. And property violence, that's a whole debate. We can have a debate about whether that should be in the same category as violence against people or not. But I think the Nepalese Gen Z protest showed, and same in Madagascar, show that if a large group of people organized around a common story, committed to these same values of courage, dignity, inclusion, opportunity, transparency. If you stay organized and you have a specific strategy that you can put pressure in the right place, you can win, because there are always more of you than there are in the palace, than the people in the palace and in the army barracks, right? The people who are in the palace and in the army barracks are always more afraid than you think they are, right? Because they know they've looked around, they've seen how quickly things can get out of control. Bashar al-Assad in Syria thought he was going to be there forever, right? That's what he told people when he tortured them in those prisons in Damascus. The Assad family will be there forever. And guess where they are now? Russia, right? So change is possible, but it requires organizing, and it requires a little bit of luck also, right? There's no guarantee. But the change is out there, and it's up to you guys to be part of making it. Maybe a couple last questions, James. Why don't you choose?
Yes, I'll call on Akshat. I see Akshat's hand is raised. Akshat, do you want to unmute and speak with Lex?
Hello, sir. First of all, sir, I would like to thank you for delivering such an insightful session. It was really, I learned some things from the session. And like you talked about, Athenian democracy and Kairos, the collective action that is needed, to get to the ends, whatever are desired. So I was reading about this book, Cybering Democracy by Diane Sacco, and in that book she basically talked about the agora and the first public participation of people in a democracy, which was, as you just said, Athenian democracy. My question is, sir, in today's age, the disconnect that is there among the citizens due to the technology, and like you talked about, polarizing social media apps. So how do we make, how can we bring together people for a greater cause, despite the odds which are stacked against us, because we have technology and these data centers that are coming up now. So people, I think the gap has widened, and it is much more difficult to unite now than, let's say, it would have been uh, in that era where technology was not that much involved in our lives.
Well, it's interesting because every generation thinks they're, thank you for the question. It's a very good question. Every generation thinks they're the modern ones, right? Whereas in fact, the Athenians also had new technologies. In their case, the new technologies were the alphabet, right, in Greek, that allowed many more people to learn how to read and allowed things like laws to be more transparent to common people. A new technology of coins, right, a way of capturing value on a piece of metal that allows wealth to be made and distributed in ways beyond just having land. And they invented a technology called the claritarion, which is like a lottery machine to create a randomized sample of the population. So we're not the first to have technology, right? Um, Technologies and climate are always changing and always evolving, right? Human societies have always changed because the climate is changing. Now we're changing the climate a lot faster ourselves now, and it's going to be a huge catastrophe because it's our fault now. But it's not the first time that a changing climate and changes in technology have changed the way human beings form societies and govern themselves. So yes, I think we need to be mindful of technology, but we're certainly not the first to be thinking about how technology changes society. I think the way the Athenians use technology is instead of using technology to centralize power, they use technology to decentralize power. So using coins to pay people to serve in the jury who wouldn't serve in the jury because they couldn't afford to give up the day of work, right? So that's using a technology in favor of greater participation, using the technology of the randomizing machine to build trust that the people selected in the jury couldn't be corrupted, right? So using technology as a force against oligarchy, against corruption, against tyranny. And we can do the same thing, right? AI is right now being controlled by and social media by a very small number of companies, but they're not the only ones with power over technology. Look at Wikipedia. Wikipedia is the greatest compilation of knowledge in all of human history, right? And no one makes $1 billion from Wikipedia, right? So it's possible to have open source technologies that are very powerful. Wikipedia is a very powerful technology, and it's not built on the model of Facebook or Twitter or ChatGPT. So I think we need to be very careful, but I don't think we need to think of ourselves as in some kind of novel situation where strategies in the past can't work. I think we need to understand, in fact, that the rules of power don't change. Technologies change, but the rules of power don't change. And so if we want to decentralize power, make a more democratic world, we need to be using the technologies that are created by people like us with the same values that we have, right? Because if you just use Facebook, you're going to be ultimately using the values of Mark Zuckerberg. And his values are not my values, right? So keep that in mind. Uh, that's a great question, though. Thank you for sharing that question.
Thank you, Lex. I see a great question also in the chat from Cassia. Cassia Minila, are you able to unmute? All right, I think we lost Cassia, but her question is, if democracy depends on diverse perspectives to make better collective decisions, how do we balance inclusion with the need for efficiency and clarity in decision making? I think this was almost similar to the meritocracy versus democracy question earlier, but if you want to just chime in, Lex.
Yeah. Okay. So again, meritocracy and expertise are not enemies of collective intelligence. They're parts of collective intelligence, but they're not the only part, right? So inclusion and diversity are really important parts of collective intelligence, but they're not the only thing that's important. You also need good methods, we call it convergent thinking, to get to a decision, right, in the most efficient way possible. Honeybees, right? Honeybees make democratic decisions. They don't have universities and computers like us, but honeybees, when they're just choosing where to go from one hive site to another hive site, right? They send lots of different bees out, and then the bees come back in. They're all female bees, and so the female bees they do a little waggle dance to show the quality and the location of the different possible sites. And then if they build up a number of people around them, right, who have also gone to that site and come and dance with them, it creates this democratic vote. Right, so over 30 million years of evolution, honeybees have created a way of making both a balanced and inclusive decision with lots of diverse information, but also an efficient one, right? That goes long enough that they don't miss a good option, but not too long that they lose their opportunity, right? So that's what you have to do when you're designing facilitation processes, right? Sometimes majority vote, that's what you want, right? And you have to be able to have a system that gets people to, okay, have everyone, we heard from everybody, okay, now we close, now we vote. Other times you really need consensus. And so if people disagree, you have to take more time, because if one person is not on board, the whole thing could fall apart. Right? So you have to design what we call the convergence step, the decision-making step of a process, in a way that's appropriate to the task and the constraints that you have, the time constraints, the constraints of how many people are involved, how serious and emotional the issue is, et cetera, how reversible it is. So this is part of the science of decision theory, which is a really important part of collective intelligence, right? You have to educate yourself. What are all the different ways we can design these methods of making decisions, and which one of those methods is the right one for the one we're doing right now? So all of that, you don't have to improvise. There's lots of good science on this, and I recommend you come and check out our resources at the School of Collective Intelligence for that. Maybe one more question?
Yes, I see a question here from Makanaka in Zimbabwe. Makanaka, are you able to unmute? All right. His question is, the question rather is to do with corruption. They say that, do all leaders start out corrupt? If not, what changes these people, and how can that be addressed in an ideal system?
Yeah. I was in Ghana last month, or in August. And a friend of mine, his family was the family doctors of Kwame Nkrumah. And they were telling me about Nkrumah. You guys know who Nkrumah was. First, he was one of the fighters for independence in Ghana, a great thinker of Pan-Africanism, and the first president of independent Ghana. And what they told me is, this is a man who was, like you and me, was someone who was not born to with this idea he was going to become president, right? He transformed himself through his activism against the British Empire, but also building coalitions and building trust and leading this drive for independence. But power changed him, not just in a good way. First, it was in a good way, but then in a bad way. And what my friends told me is that, yeah, toward the end of his presidency, he became paranoid. He isolated himself in the palace in Accra. He locked people up for random reasons. He abused his power. And so we see that power can really transform us, both for the better and for the worse. And having too much power for too long almost always transforms us for the worst, right? Which is why the best thing you can do with power is share it. But unfortunately, a lot of people, especially men, don't like sharing. And that means that once they get power, they never want to give it back again. And I've never seen an example, whether it's Museveni or Dos Santos or Biya or any other, or Mugabe or any other of these presidents for life, right? That their presidency got better over time. Can anyone say that they did better as they got older? No, right? So there's some people who were definitely corrupt from the start, who just wanted to make money for themselves and get into the system, right? And there's some people who start out really wanting to do good, but then they find themselves, living this nice, comfortable life, and maybe they're afraid that when they leave power, they're going to be put in prison, or they don't really have any future beyond being in power. I've seen this in Senegal. I did a lot of work with Macky Sall. I think that was one of his shortcomings. He was a great man in some ways, but I think he really, really, really mishandled the end of his presidency in a way that will really hurt his legacy in Senegal. then again, it was the young people of Senegal who came together and organized and made that change happen. But yeah, power corrupts, which is why we need to share it and rotate it, right? And that's what the Athenians understood, right? You rotate power. That's what you do is you raise the average level of intelligence in the society, right? If more people get a chance to take part in public decisions, they learn, they go back and they share that knowledge, and you don't have the chance for one person or one family or one political party to get too much power for too long. Too much power for too long is always a bad thing for the human mind.
Thank you very much, Lex. I think that brings us to the end. I speak for everyone when I say we should do this for another hour, but duty calls, so we'll let you go. I'll give you the mic in case you wanted to share any final thoughts with everyone in the room.
So I just wanted to encourage you guys, check out the Leading Change Network, LCN, online. I put the note in the chat. They have great resources for building movements. Check out our website, School Collective Intelligence. You could tap or our LinkedIn profile to learn more about what we do. Check out my YouTube channel, which is totally free. And I basically make videos for my students, so they're not like designed for a massive, huge audience. But I welcome you guys if you want to learn more about anything I said today. You'll find a lot of resources on my YouTube channel. And feel free to add any comments there. If you have questions, it's a good way of being in touch with me. And I really want to encourage all the Millennium Fellows to treat leadership, right, not as a status, as something you are. Treat leadership as something you do, right? And we need more leadership in the world, and you can practice it, and everybody in your community can practice it, and you're going to be smarter and stronger if you practice it together. So thank you guys very much for having me, and I wish you very well and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you very much, Lex, and you can see the outpouring of appreciation in the chat. Millennium Fellows, tomorrow we'll have another webinar with the author Ellen Banda. And on Thursday, we'll have a webinar with Ambassador Scott Delisi. So please make a point to RSVP. Once again, thank you all for making time, and I wish you all a wonderful week.
Thank you, guys. Take care.